The space station called Nexaris 7 was not a place for decent people, and Commander Elias Vance knew this the moment his boots touched the rusted metal floor. He had come here for ship parts, nothing more and nothing less. His old cargo vessel needed a new fuel converter, and the legitimate markets charged prices that would drain his entire account. So here he was, walking through corridors filled with smugglers and thieves, and creatures that watched him with hungry eyes. Humans were still rare in this part of the galaxy. Most alien species called Earth a death world because of its harsh conditions and violent history. They looked at humans with a mixture of fear and curiosity, wondering how such emotional and chaotic beings had ever survived long enough to reach the stars. Elias ignored their stares as he pushed through the crowded marketplace. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes, his face marked by decades of hard work in deep space. He had retired from the military years ago and now made his living hauling cargo between frontier worlds. It was a simple life, a quiet life, and that was exactly what he wanted. But the universe had other plans for him today. He heard the noise before he saw its source, a great roar of voices coming from a massive chamber at the end of the corridor. Creatures of all shapes and sizes were pushing their way inside, holding up credit chips and shouting numbers. Elias knew what this was even before he entered. An auction. Not just any auction, but the illegal kind, where living beings were sold like furniture. He should have turned around and walked away. He should have found his fuel converter and left this cursed station behind. But something pulled him forward, some force he could not name, and before he knew it, he was standing at the edge of the crowd. The chamber was enormous, filled with hundreds of aliens sitting in curved rows around a central platform. Bright lights illuminated the stage, where a thin creature with too many arms was presenting the merchandise. Elias watched in disgust as exotic animals were paraded out one by one. Beautiful beings from distant worlds, reduced to products for wealthy collectors. And now, the auctioneer announced in a voice that echoed through the chamber, "We present our final item of the evening." A cage was wheeled onto the stage, and the crowd fell silent. Inside the cage was a dragon. No, not exactly a dragon, but that was the closest word Elias could find in his mind. The creature had a long serpentine body covered in scales, 4 powerful legs ending in curved claws, and a head that seemed almost noble in its shape. Great wings lay folded against its back, and Elias could see where bioluminescent patterns should have glowed along its hide. But there was no glow. The scales that should have shimmered with cosmic light were dull and gray, like ashes from a dead fire. Deep scars crossed the creature's body, evidence of countless wounds, and its eyes, those great golden eyes, held nothing but emptiness. "A Varathi," the auctioneer said with a dramatic wave of his many arms, "also known as a cosmic dragon, once worshipped as gods by primitive cultures across the galaxy, now nearly extinct and extremely valuable." The crowd murmured with interest, but Elias noticed something strange. No one was raising their credit chips. No one was shouting bids. However, the auctioneer continued with clear disappointment in his voice, "I must inform potential buyers that this particular specimen is somewhat defective. It refuses to perform, refuses to fight, refuses to do much of anything really. Previous owners found it completely useless." Someone in the crowd laughed. "It looks half dead already." "More trouble than it is worth," another voice called out. The auctioneer tried to generate interest, lowering the starting price again and again, but no one wanted the broken dragon. They called it damaged goods, a waste of credits, a creature too pathetic to bother with. Elias stared at the Varathi and felt something crack inside his chest. The dragon did not roar or struggle against its cage. It did not try to intimidate the crowd or show any sign of the magnificent power its species was known for. It simply lay there, waiting, as if it had accepted long ago that nothing good would ever happen to it again. Elias had seen that look before. He had seen it in the eyes of soldiers who had lost everything, in refugees who had given up hope, in broken people who had forgotten how to believe in tomorrow. He knew that look because he had worn it himself once, long ago, after his wife had died and left him alone in the cold vastness of space. "Final call," the auctioneer said with obvious boredom. "Any bids at all for this worthless creature?" Elias raised his hand. The entire chamber turned to look at him. A human, one of those strange emotional creatures from the death world, was actually bidding on the broken dragon. 1,000 credits, Elias said, and his voice did not shake. The auctioneer blinked several of his many eyes. "Sold. Sold to the human in the back. Please collect your purchase, and may the stars have mercy on your foolish soul." Laughter filled the chamber as Elias made his way to the stage. Aliens pointed at him and whispered jokes about the stupid human and his worthless prize. But Elias did not care about their mockery. He had spent his entire savings, the money meant for his fuel converter, for his repairs, for his future, on a creature everyone else had thrown away. The cage was brought to him, and he knelt down to look at the Virathi up close. She was even more damaged than he had realized, her body thin from hunger, and her spirit crushed by years of cruelty. Up close, he could see that she was female, and that she was very, very old, despite her withered appearance. "Hey there," he said softly, as if speaking to a frightened child. "My name is Elias. I am going to take you away from here, okay? I am going to take you somewhere safe." The dragon did not respond. She did not even look at him. Elias opened the cage and attached a gentle lead to her collar. He would remove that horrible thing later, once they were aboard his ship. He stood and began walking toward the exit, and the Virathi followed behind him with slow mechanical steps. The crowd parted around them, still laughing at the absurd sight. A Thessian merchant blocked their path for a moment, his blue face twisted with amusement. "Humans," he said with a sneer. "Your species will bond with anything, even garbage. What a waste of perfectly good credits." Elias said nothing. He simply walked around the merchant and continued toward the docking bay where his ship waited. It was only when they reached the airlock of the wandering hearth that the dragon made any sound at all. Elias was leading her up the ramp when she suddenly stopped, and he turned to see her looking at him with those hollow golden eyes. When she spoke, her voice was cracked and broken, as if she had not used it in many years. It was barely a whisper, carried on breath that smelled like dying stars. Why? Just one simple question. But it carried the weight of decades of suffering, of confusion, of desperate need to understand. Elias looked at the saddest dragon in the galaxy and gave her the only answer he had. "Because everyone deserves a chance," he said. "Even those the universe has forgotten." Then he led her inside, and the airlock closed behind them. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, something small and precious began to stir. The wandering hearth was not a beautiful ship, but it was home. Elias guided the Virathi through the narrow corridors, past the small kitchen and the cramped living quarters, until they reached the cargo bay at the back. He had cleared a space there before leaving for the station, filling it with old blankets and soft padding. He had not known what he would bring back, but some part of him had prepared for something like this. "This is yours," he told the dragon, as she looked at the makeshift nest with empty eyes. "You can rest here. No one will hurt you, I promise." The Virathi said nothing. She simply walked into the space and lay down, curling her long body into a tight ball. Her dull gray scales seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, and Elias felt his heart ache at the sight. He removed her collar that first night, cutting through the metal with his tools. She did not react when it fell away, did not seem to notice or care. Elias set food and water beside her before retreating to give her space. She did not eat. The first 3 days were the hardest. The Virathi refused all food, refused water, refused to acknowledge that Elias existed. She lay in her corner like a statue, breathing slowly, staring at nothing. Sometimes Elias would catch her looking at him when she thought he was not watching. But the moment their eyes met, she would turn away. He learned her name on the 4th day. Elias had been researching Virathi culture on his ship's database, reading everything he could find about her species. Most of the information was sad. They had been hunted nearly to extinction, their homeworld now a protected sanctuary with only a handful of survivors. They were empaths, able to feel the emotions of those around them, and they lived for thousands of years. He found a list of traditional Virathi names and their meanings. One caught his attention, Silvara, which meant starlight in the old tongue. He shortened it to Sil and began using it when he spoke to her. "Good morning, Sil," he would say when he woke. "I hope you slept well." "I made some food, Sil," he would announce at mealtimes. "It is here if you want it." "Good night, Sil," he would whisper before turning off the lights. "Tomorrow will be better, I promise." She never responded, but he kept talking anyway. Elias was not a man who gave up easily. He had survived wars and disasters and the death of everyone he loved. He knew that healing took time, and he was prepared to wait as long as necessary. During the day, he would sit in the cargo bay and read aloud from old books stored in the ship's computer. He read adventure stories and poetry and scientific journals, filling the silence with words. He did not know if Sil was listening, but he hoped the sound of his voice might bring her some small comfort. On the 7th day, she drank water. It was such a small thing, but Elias nearly cried when he saw it. He had left a bowl beside her as always, expecting nothing, and when he returned an hour later, it was empty. He refilled it immediately and left more food nearby. On the 10th day she ate, just a few bites of the protein supplement he had prepared, but it was progress. Elias wanted to celebrate, wanted to tell her how proud he was, but he forced himself to stay calm. He did not want to scare her with sudden emotion. The ship drifted through quiet space lanes during those weeks, far from busy trade routes and prying eyes. Elias took no jobs and made no stops. His only mission was caring for the broken dragon, who had somehow become his responsibility. He learned about her past in pieces. Sometimes when Sil thought he was sleeping, she would make sounds in her throat. Not words exactly, but something close to crying. Other times she would thrash in her sleep, fighting invisible enemies, her claws scratching against the metal floor. Elias would approach slowly during these nightmares, and speak in a gentle voice until she calmed. One night, she spoke in her sleep. The words were in a language Elias did not understand, but his translator caught some of them. "Please stop, and no more, and let me die." He did not sleep well after that. Slowly, painfully, the pieces came together. Sil had been captured as a young hatchling, torn from her family before she could even fly. She had been sold to fighting pits where creatures battled for the entertainment of wealthy aliens. For 40 years, she had been forced to fight and kill and suffer. When she became too broken to continue, when she no longer had the will to raise her claws against another living being, she was declared useless. Her owners had dumped her at the auction on Nexaris 7, expecting her to die on the stage. And she would have died. She had wanted to die. But then a strange human with sad eyes had looked at her and seen something worth saving. Elias did not understand why she fascinated him so much. He only knew that every time he looked at her, he saw himself reflected in her pain. He too had wanted to give up once. He too had lost everything and seen no reason to continue. But somehow he had survived, had found reasons to keep going, and he believed she could do the same. 1 month after the auction, Syl moved for the first time. Elias was sitting in the cargo bay reading a story about ancient Earth explorers when he felt something warm press against his side. He looked down and found Syl there, her long body curled against him, her head resting near his leg. She was not looking at him, was staring at the wall as if nothing had happened. But she was touching him. She was choosing to be close to him. Elias kept reading, his voice steady, even as tears rolled down his cheeks. He did not reach out to touch her, did not make any sudden movements. He simply accepted her presence and continued the story. From that night forward, she slept beside him. Her scales began to change in the weeks that followed. The dull gray started to fade, replaced by hints of deep violet and shimmering silver. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but Elias watched it happen with growing hope. She began eating regularly, gaining weight, growing stronger. Her movements became less mechanical and more natural. Sometimes she would lift her head when Elias entered the room, and once, just once, he thought he saw something like interest in her golden eyes. They were docked at a small trading post when a Thessian merchant approached Elias at a supply store. The blue-skinned alien looked at the human with obvious contempt. "I heard about you," the merchant said. "The fool who bought the broken dragon. How is your garbage doing? Has it died yet?" Elias smiled. "She is doing better every day." The merchant laughed. "Humans, you bond with anything. You pour emotion into creatures that cannot possibly return it. What a pathetic species you are." Elias thought about Syl waiting for him on the ship, about her warmth against his side, about the tiny changes that meant everything. He did not argue with the merchant. There was no point in explaining something that alien minds could not understand. That night, back on the wandering hearth, Syl spoke to him for the second time since the auction. She had been watching him prepare dinner, her golden eyes following his movements with an intensity that surprised him. "Your kind," she said, her voice still rough but stronger than before, "feels so much. Your emotions burn like fire. How do you survive it?" Elias thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "We do not always survive it," he admitted. "Sometimes the feelings are too much and they break us. But we keep trying, Syl. We keep feeling, because the alternative is worse. A life without emotion is no life at all." Then she did something she had never done before. She moved closer and pressed her forehead gently against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, "for feeling enough for both of us." Elias wrapped his arms around her and held on tight. And in that moment, the human and the dragon began to heal together. 6 months had passed since the auction on Nexaris 7, and Syl was becoming someone new. Her scales now shimmered with deep violet and brilliant silver, catching the light like living gemstones. She had grown larger, too, her body filling out as proper nutrition and rest worked their magic. The scars remained. They would always remain, but they no longer defined her. Elias had taken a job hauling cargo on a frontier planet called Vareth 4. The work was simple, and the pay was decent, enough to keep the wandering hearth flying and both of them fed. More importantly, the planet was quiet and safe, far from the cruel attention of the core worlds. Syl had started following Elias everywhere. When he left the ship to negotiate contracts, she walked beside him. When he loaded cargo into the hold, she helped by carrying smaller crates in her jaws. When strangers approached with hostile intent, she would step forward and let a low growl build in her throat. She was protecting him, and the realization made Elias smile every time. The other aliens on Vareth 4 did not know what to make of them. A human and a Virathi traveling together as equals was unheard of. Most species kept Virathi as trophies or weapons, displaying them in cages or sending them into battle. No one treated them as companions, as friends, as family. But that was exactly what Syl and Elias had become. "You are strange," Syl told him one evening, as they watched the sunset over Varath 4's purple mountains. "All humans are strange, but you more than most." "Why do you say that?" Elias asked. "Because you feel everything so deeply," she replied. "Most species keep their emotions locked away, hidden like shameful secrets. But humans wear their feelings on their skin. I can sense your emotions from across the ship, burning like a star." Elias nodded. He had learned about Virathi empathy during his research, but experiencing it was different from reading about it. "Does it bother you?" he asked. Syl was quiet for a moment. "For many years I was surrounded by creatures who felt only greed and cruelty. Their emotions were cold and sharp, like knives cutting into my mind. I learned to close myself off, to feel nothing, to become empty." She turned to look at him with those golden eyes that now held so much life. "But your emotions are different. They are warm like sunlight. Even your sadness feels gentle, like rain that helps things grow. Being near you does not hurt, it heals." Elias reached out and placed his hand on her neck, feeling the warmth of her scales beneath his palm. "I am glad I can help." Word began to spread about them. Traders and travelers carried stories from Varath 4 to other worlds, telling tales of the human and his dragon. Some laughed at the absurdity of it. Others wondered if there was something special about humans, something that allowed them to connect with even the most broken creatures. A xenobiologist named Dr. Kethra arrived one day, requesting permission to study them. She was a tall being with 4 eyes and skin that changed color with her mood, and she approached Syl with the careful respect of a true scientist. "I have spent my entire career studying Virathi," she told Elias, while Syl watched from nearby. "I have observed dozens of them in captivity and in the wild, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what I am seeing here should be impossible." "What do you mean?" Elias asked. "Virathi who are captured and mistreated do not recover," Dr. Kethra explained. "Their spirits break, and they simply waste away. I have never seen one heal from the kind of damage your companion has endured. The fact that she is walking, eating, communicating, forming bonds, it defies everything we know." She leaned closer, her 4 eyes fixed on Elias with intense curiosity. "What did you do to her? What treatment did you use? What drugs or therapies?" Elias shrugged. "I did not do anything special. I just treated her like a person. I gave her food and shelter and time. I talked to her even when she did not respond. I let her know she was not alone." Dr. Kethra stared at him for a long moment, her skin shifting through several colors. "That is it? You simply treated her with kindness?" "Kindness and patience," Elias confirmed. "That is all." The scientist shook her head in amazement. "Humans, your species never stops surprising us. You pour emotion into everything you touch, and somehow it works. Perhaps there is something to this human bonding phenomenon after all." After Dr. Kethra left, Syl pressed close to Elias and spoke in a low voice. "She is right, you know. What you did for me should have been impossible. I had given up on everything, including myself. I was ready to die." "What changed?" Elias asked. "You did," Syl answered. "On that stage, surrounded by creatures who saw me as worthless garbage, you looked at me and felt something different. I sensed your emotions, Elias. You did not feel disgust or greed or the desire to own me. You felt compassion. You felt sorrow for my pain. You felt a need to help that was so strong it burned." She wrapped her tail around him gently. "I had forgotten that such feelings existed. You reminded me." Their peaceful life on Varath 4 was about to end. Elias was in town, negotiating a new hauling contract, when his communicator buzzed with an urgent message from the ship. Syl's voice came through, tense and afraid in a way he had not heard for months. Elias, there is a ship approaching. A big one. I recognize the markings. He was running before she finished speaking. Who is it, Sil? Who is coming? The pause before her answer stretched like a knife wound. Groth Malik, she finally said. My old owner. The one who broke me. Elias reached the wandering hearth to find Sil pacing the cargo bay, her scales flickering with agitation. Through the viewport, he could see the massive warship descending through the atmosphere, its weapons arrays gleaming in the sunlight. How did he find us? Elias demanded. The stories, Sil realized. The travelers who spread word about us. He must have heard that his property was still alive. The communicator crackled, and a new voice filled the ship, deep and cold and filled with cruel amusement. Well, 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 my little broken dragon still lives. I thought you would have died by now, but it seems someone has been taking care of you. How touching. Elijah grabbed the communicator. This is Commander Elias Vance. The Virathi is not your property. She is a free being under my protection. Leave this system immediately. Laughter echoed through the speakers. A human? A human thinks he can give me orders? How amusing. Listen carefully, little ape. That dragon belongs to me. I paid good money for her, trained her, invested in her. When she stopped being useful, I threw her away. But now I hear she has recovered, and that makes her valuable again. She is not going with you, Elias said firmly. Then you will both die, Malik replied, without emotion. I have 300 soldiers on this ship, and enough firepower to level this entire settlement. Surrender the dragon, or I will take her from your corpse. The transmission ended. Elias turned to look at Sil. Her scales were now blazing with color, violet and silver, and hints of white that he had never seen before. But it was her eyes that shocked him most. They were no longer golden, but burning with inner fire. 40 years, she said, and her voice had changed too, becoming deeper and more powerful. 40 years he tormented me. 40 years of pain and humiliation and despair. I became nothing because of him. She rose to her full height, and Elias realized with astonishment that she was larger than he had ever seen her, much larger. She had been hiding her true size, too weak and hopeless to reveal it. But I am not nothing anymore, Sil declared. You taught me that, Elias. You showed me that I still matter. And now that monster has come to threaten the one person in this galaxy who ever showed me kindness. Her scales ignited with light, filling the cargo bay with brilliance. He has made a terrible mistake. Groth Malik's warship hung over Verath 4 like a metal mountain, blocking out the sun. Elias watched through the viewport as smaller attack vessels began launching from the main ship, spreading across the sky like angry insects. His old cargo hauler had no weapons worth mentioning, no shields that could withstand military firepower. Against this force, he was completely helpless. But he was not going to surrender. Sil, we need to run, he said urgently. If we can reach the asteroid belt, we might be able to hide until— No more running, Sil interrupted. Her voice resonated with power he had never heard before. I spent 40 years running from him, hiding from my own strength, letting him control me. That ends today. She moved toward the cargo bay doors, her body shifting and growing with each step. The Sil he had nursed back to health had been large, perhaps twice his size, but that had been a shadow of her true form. Now she was expanding, her scales blazing with violet and white fire, her wings unfurling to reveal spans that seemed impossibly vast. Sil, wait! Elias grabbed her leg, and she stopped to look down at him. You cannot fight an entire warship alone. They have hundreds of soldiers and weapons that could destroy cities. This is suicide. Her golden eyes, now burning with inner flame, softened when they met his. You saved me, she said gently. When I had nothing left, when I wanted only to die, you gave me a reason to live. You showed me that kindness still exists, that I could be more than what they made me. Do you think I would let anything happen to you? I cannot lose you, Elias whispered. Not after everything we have been through. Syl lowered her massive head and pressed it against his chest, just as she had done on that night months ago, when she first chose to trust him. But you must trust me now, as I trusted you. Can you do that? Elias looked into her eyes and saw something he had not seen before. Not just hope, but absolute certainty. She was not going to fight out of desperation or rage. She knew exactly what she was doing. I trust you, he said. Syl smiled. Actually smiled, a expression he had never seen on a Virathi before. And then she burst through the cargo doors and launched herself into the sky. The transformation was complete now. She was enormous, a creature of legend made real, her body blazing with cosmic light. The scales that had once been dull gray now shone like a galaxy-made flesh, violet and silver and brilliant white swirling together in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Every living being in the sector felt what happened next. Syl did not speak with words. She projected, sending her thoughts directly into the minds of everyone nearby. Her message crashed over Malak's fleet like a tidal wave, forcing them to listen, forcing them to understand. I was broken. Images flooded their minds, memories of capture, of cages, of blood and pain and endless cruelty. They felt what Syl had felt, experienced her suffering as if it were their own. I was nothing. More memories, the hollow emptiness of despair, the terrible weight of wanting to die, the darkness that consumed everything good and left only ash behind. One human looked at me and saw someone worth saving. Now the memories changed. They felt Elias reading aloud while she pretended not to listen. They felt his gentle patience, his stubborn hope, his refusal to give up. They felt the warmth of his emotions surrounding her like a blanket, slowly thawing the ice around her heart. He gave me something your species will never understand. Unconditional kindness. Syl's voice thundered through their minds, and with it came a revelation. Humans were not the weak, overly emotional creatures the galaxy believed them to be. Their capacity to care, to love, to bond with those who needed them was not a weakness, but a strength beyond measure. And now I remember what I am. She opened her mouth, and cosmic fire poured forth. It was not ordinary flame. Virathi fire burned with the heat of stars, plasma so intense it could vaporize metal in microseconds. The first attack vessel simply ceased to exist, consumed by brilliance, before its pilot could even scream. But Syl was not mindless in her fury. She targeted weapons and engines, crippling ships without killing their crews. The second vessel spun away, its propulsion destroyed. The third and fourth followed, dead in space, but their life support systems intact. Malak's fleet scattered in panic. They had expected a broken, pathetic creature, easy prey for their superior numbers. Instead, they faced a cosmic dragon in her full glory, blazing with righteous anger, protecting the human who had given her back her soul. Fire everything! Malak screamed over the fleet communications. Destroy her! Weapons blazed across the sky, missiles and energy beams converging on Syl from all directions. She twisted and dove through the barrage, her wings cutting through space with impossible grace. Some shots struck her scales and bounced away harmlessly. Virathi hide could withstand temperatures that would melt starship hulls. She was beautiful. She was terrifying. She was everything her species had once been, before the galaxy had tried to crush them into nothing. More ships fell, their weapons silenced, their crews scrambling for escape pods. Syl did not pursue the fleeing survivors. She focused only on those who continued to attack, who continued to threaten the planet where Elias waited. Finally, only the main warship remained. Syl circled the massive vessel, her cosmic fire held in check, waiting. The ship's weapon systems had powered down, and the surviving crew was abandoning their stations. Only one being remained on the bridge. She tore through the hull like paper. Groth Malak stood in the wreckage of his command center, a slug-like creature covered in thick gray skin, his tiny eyes wide with terror. He had controlled hundreds of fighting beasts over the centuries, had built an empire on the suffering of creatures like Syl. Now, he was alone and helpless before his greatest victim. "Please," he whimpered. "Please, I will give you anything. Credits, ships, territory, name your price." Syl stared at him for a long moment. She could feel his emotions, greed and fear and cruelty, all mixed together, the same cold sharpness that had tortured her for 40 years. "I do not want anything from you," she said, her voice quiet now, but no less powerful. "I want you to understand." She reached out with her mind and gave him her memories, all of them. Every fight she had been forced into, every wound she had suffered, every moment of despair when death seemed like the only escape. She poured decades of pain directly into his consciousness, letting him experience what he had done to her. Malak collapsed, screaming, clutching his head as her suffering overwhelmed his mind. He was not physically harmed, but his spirit crumbled under the weight of his own cruelty reflected back at him. When Syl finally withdrew, he lay on the floor, broken and whimpering, no longer the powerful crime lord who had terrorized the galaxy. He would live, but he would never forget. He would never be the same. "Tell everyone what you experienced here," Syl commanded. "Tell them what happens when you threaten those under my protection. Tell them that the Virati are not your toys to break." She left him there, among the wreckage of his empire. Elias was waiting when she returned to the wandering hearth. He had watched the battle from the cargo bay, heart pounding with fear and pride and overwhelming love. As Syl descended from the sky, her body shrinking back to its smaller form, he ran to meet her. She landed hard, exhausted, her scales dimming as her energy faded. She had given everything to protect him, pushed herself beyond her limits, become something magnificent and terrible. "Was that too much fire?" she asked weakly, managing a small smile. Elias laughed through his tears and wrapped his arms around her neck. "It was perfect," he said. "Absolutely perfect." They stayed there together as the sun set over Vareth IV, the human and his dragon, two broken souls who had somehow made each other whole. The story spread across the galaxy like wildfire. News networks on every inhabited world carried reports of what had happened on Vareth IV. They showed footage captured by orbital satellites, a cosmic dragon blazing with impossible light, destroying a crime lord's fleet, protecting a single human cargo hauler. The images were replayed millions of times, analyzed by experts, debated by philosophers. But it was not the battle that captured the galaxy's attention. It was the story behind it. A human had walked into an auction and purchased a broken, dying Varathi that no one else wanted. He had nursed her back to health with nothing but patience and kindness. And she had risen from despair to become something magnificent, all because one strange emotional creature from a death world had refused to give up on her. Scientists called it the human bonding phenomenon. Dr. Kethra, the xenobiologist who had visited them on Vareth IV, became famous for her research papers on the subject. She argued that humans possessed a unique ability to form deep emotional connections with other species, an ability that could heal psychological damage thought to be permanent. "We have long dismissed human emotions as excessive and irrational," she wrote in her most famous paper. "We have mocked their tendency to bond with anything and everything. But perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps their emotional intensity is not a weakness, but an extraordinary gift, one that the rest of the galaxy desperately needs to understand. Other Virathi began to emerge from hiding. For centuries, the survivors of that ancient species had scattered across the galaxy, hiding in remote corners, avoiding contact with races that had hunted and enslaved them. They had lost hope that things would ever change, that anyone would ever see them as more than valuable commodities. But they had felt Syl's psychic cry during the battle. Her memories, her healing, her triumphant return to power, all of it had reached across the vast distances of space and touched their minds. For the first time in generations, they dared to believe that the universe might have a place for them. Messages began arriving at the wandering hearth from Virathi all over the galaxy. They wanted to meet the human who had done the impossible. They wanted to see with their own eyes the bond that had brought one of their own back from the edge of death. Elias was overwhelmed by the attention. He was just a retired cargo hauler, a simple man who had done what seemed right. He did not feel like a hero or a revolutionary. "I do not understand why everyone cares so much," he told Syl one evening as they reviewed the latest batch of messages. "I did not do anything special. I just treated you like you deserved to be treated." Syl wrapped her tail around him gently. "That is exactly why they care," she explained. "Because for most of the galaxy, treating someone with kindness is special. They have forgotten how to do it, or they never learned. You reminded them that it is possible." An invitation arrived from Virathi Prime, the sacred homeworld that had been closed to outsiders for centuries. The Elder Council of the surviving Virthi requested the presence of Elias Vance and Silvara for a ceremony of great importance. Elias was nervous as the wandering hearth approached the protected world. Virthi Prime was beautiful beyond description, a planet of crystalline mountains and bioluminescent forests, where the very air shimmered with ancient power. Only a few hundred Virthi still lived here, the last remnants of a once great civilization. They were met at the landing site by a delegation of elders, massive dragons whose scales bore the scars of countless centuries. Their eyes were ancient and wise, filled with sorrow, but also with something new, something that looked like hope. "Welcome, Elias Vance of Earth," the eldest of them said, her voice resonating with power. "We have waited a very long time to meet someone like you." The ceremony was held in a great temple carved from living crystal, where generations of Virathi had gathered to honor their traditions. Hundreds of dragons filled the space, their scales creating a rainbow of colors, their eyes fixed on the small human who stood among them. Syl stayed close to Elias, her presence reassuring him as the Elder Council began to speak. "Our species has suffered greatly," the eldest dragon declared. "We have been hunted, enslaved, and nearly destroyed. Many of us lost hope that we would ever find allies in this cold universe." She turned her ancient eyes to Elias. "But you have shown us something we had forgotten. You have proven that kindness still exists, that empathy and compassion are not extinct. You looked at our sister Silvara when she was broken and worthless in the eyes of the galaxy, and you saw someone worth saving." The dragon lowered her great head in a gesture of respect. "For this, we offer you the highest honor our people can bestow. We name you Kethvor, Kin of Flame. From this day forward, you are family to the Virathi. Our enemies are your enemies. Our homes are your homes. Our hearts are open to you." Elias felt tears streaming down his face as the assembled dragons raised their voices in a song that shook the temple. He was the first non-Virathi in history to receive this honor, the first outsider to be adopted into their ancient family. After the ceremony, Syl was approached by the elders with a different offer. "Silvara, daughter of stars, you have suffered more than most," they said gently. "You deserve peace and rest. We offer you a permanent place here on Virathi Prime, among your own kind. You would never have to fear again." Syl looked around at the beautiful world, at the dragons who shared her blood, at the home she had never known. It was everything she could have wanted during those terrible years in the fighting pits. Safety, belonging, family. But then she looked at Elias. He was trying to smile, trying to be happy for her. But she could feel his emotions through their bond. There was pride and joy and love, but underneath it all was a deep sadness, the fear of losing her, the knowledge that he would support her choice, even if it broke his heart. "May I have time to consider?" Syl asked the elders. They granted her request, and Syl led Elias away from the temple to a quiet hillside, overlooking the crystal forests. They sat together in silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You should stay," Elias finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is your home. These are your people. You deserve to be happy after everything you have been through." "Elias," Syl said softly, "do you remember what you told me on that first day, when I asked why you saved me?" "I said, everyone deserves a chance," he recalled. "And what you taught me in the month that followed, about healing and hope and finding reasons to keep going." Elias nodded, unable to speak. Syl pressed her forehead against his, just as she had done so many times before. "You taught me that home is not a place," she said. "Home is whoever makes you feel whole. And that is you, Elias. It has always been you." She pulled back and smiled at him. A real smile, warm and bright. "I am staying with you. Wherever you go, I go. We are family now, not because of ceremonies or traditions, but because we chose each other." Elias wrapped his arms around her and held on tight, crying freely, happier than he had been in decades. The next morning, the wandering hearth departed from Virathi Prime. The elder dragons watched from the surface as the little ship climbed into the sky, carrying the human and his dragon toward new adventures among the stars. 300 years later, a historian would write about them in the Galactic archives. By then, the story of Elias and Syl had become legend, taught to children of every species as an example of what was possible when beings chose kindness over cruelty. The final entry in the historical record would read, "It is often asked why humanity rose so quickly among the stars, earning the respect and alliance of species far older and more powerful. The answer is not their technology, nor their warfare. It is this: where others saw broken things, humans saw family, and the galaxy was never the same. But for Elias and Syl, none of that mattered. What mattered was the warmth of each other's presence, the quiet moments between adventures, the knowledge that neither of them would ever be alone again. They had found something rare and precious, not just friendship, not just partnership, but a bond that transcended species and expectations. A human and his dragon, against the galaxy, together, always.